Alright, this is going to be a video that probably utterly gets me flamed for a lot of reasons, and some of them good, some of them bad, because I'm going to come off like a vindictive jerk, I think, at points of this. But I'm going to talk about the UFC myth, Dana White, Fedor, and casual fans of the sport of mixed martial arts. I like to think of myself as a pretty knowledgeable, hardcore MMA fan. Some of you may not agree with me on that, and that is your opinion, and that is fine. There are guys on here like Phantom UFC fan, the MMA Analyst, Divine Massacre, Ms. 2003K, even MMA Insight, who at times, you know, can argue with me on a point-for-point basis, and I feel have solidly beaten me. And then there are people that, you know, argue with me, and you just get the opinion they don't really understand what they're talking about, and that's been getting to me lately. That's been incredibly annoying. It's like arguing with a child at times, because some people just don't seem to overly learn. But without further ado, let's get into the UFC myth. The UFC myth is multi-layered and multifaceted. For one thing, the UFC has, of course, marketed the term ultimate fighting to the point where there are a lot of UFC fans who don't, when you say MMA, they don't know what it is. And that's a problem when it's a sport. It's like the NHL being, you know, like fans of the NHL not knowing what hockey is, or MLS fans not knowing what soccer is, or NFL fans not knowing what football is. Or K1 fans not knowing what kickboxing is. That's actually a really good one. And you don't get that in other sports. You get that with the UFC because you have a lot of people who don't take time to analyze the sport and see kind of through the bullshit the UFC shovels them, and they get this bullshit shoveled into their mouths, and they ask for more. It's just troubling. Another part of the UFC myth is the UFC is the only place where you can see top-level MMA artists. This is bullshit. If you were to do a top 50 in all 7 relevant MMA weight classes, which is heavyweight down to bantamweight, agreed, you would get a large majority of fighters in the UFC or WEC. They're the greatest collection of top-ranked fighters. But they don't have the number ones in every weight class, for one thing. They don't have Fedor. And people argue with me all the time on Fedor. I'm going to go into that one particularly in incredible detail. They don't have the ranked 155-pound man. And people are going to say they have BJ Penn. And I agree, BJ Penn is the best fighter at 155. But he's going to have a very hard time ever getting that number 1 ranked spot when he's not fighting the other top-ranked fighters. And you gotta remember, the UFC folded its lightweight division back when I believe it was in the UFC 40s, late 40s, early 50s. I should have looked that up really. And Pride basically became your big the top 10 wasn't Pride. It was, you know, Gomi, people like Gomi, Kawajiri, Hellboy Hansen, Mitsuhiro Ishida, Gilbert Melendez, who I never thought was all that good, but you know, this is something I think people need to grasp, is that rankings are based on achievements, not necessarily who you think is even the best fighter. And the other thing is that, you know, because you have the belt, and specifically because you have the UFC belt, it's not guaranteed you're the number 1 fighter. People did that with Matt Serra, people did that with BJ Penn. It's asinine. But you know, there's a lot of other guys that can be mentioned here. And when Pride went under, the UFC purchased none of those contracts. None. Even though some actually came with the Pride deal. Hellboy Hansen, and you know, for the life of me, I honestly can't remember if it was Ishida or Kawajiri. They brought no one over. They brought Marcus Aurelio, who was a BJJ only fighter. Like, you watch his fights, he has no other real skills. They brought him over. They had him fight some people to make him look good, because it's like, this is the big bad guy who beat Gomi. Even though he got, killed in the rematch. We're not going to mention that. And it's going to make it look like, the UFC lightweight division is actually up to par with, the world's UFC, or the world's lightweight division. And it may be. This is one thing I'm going to freely admit, is guys like Sean Shirk, Kenny Florian, Frankie Edgar, BJ Penn. Could they beat these guys? We don't know. And that's the problem with ranking them at the top. Because in order to get a top ranking, it's like, you can't be the #1 fighter in the world and never have fought a guy who's ranked in the top 10. It just doesn't happen. So, in conclusion, the UFC does not have every one of the best fighters in the world. The illusion that the UFC would also like to put up is that they are not crooked. And you've seen that recently with their case against EA Sports, and of course against Dream recently with the Miracle Crow Cop thing, and how they're blaming Dream for the whole thing. Because, the Japanese are, crooked while they're... Finish the word. I believe that's the exact word Danny used. And you gotta ask yourself, who's more... How do you get off calling other people crooked when you yourself give title shots that are not warranted? You give Brock Lesnar a title shot for beating Heath Herring. You know what? You can't rationalize that away, people. You really can't. Because you look at, Heath Herring losing to Jake O'Brien. Back when Herring was actually a relatively pretty respected heavyweight, that was the fight that kind of, sent Herring from, somewhere around here to, somewhere below the camera. And he got no title shot. He has basically been thrashed on ever since. And, a guy whose biggest win is over Czech Congo is apparently the gatekeeper to Brock Lesnar getting a title shot. Did Brock prove that he could take the title? Yes. But you know what? There were very few people who picked Randy Couture to win that fight. I was not among them. Brock is a bigger, stronger wrestler, and Randy in the past has had a problem with that. You look at his fights with Barnett and Rico Rodriguez. And, I even picked Gabriel Gonzaga over him because of those fights, because I thought, except Gabriel fell in love with a high kick. I apologize for, rambling a fair bit in this video. But you can't justify that. You can't justify Patrick O'Tay getting a title shot after barely beating Ricardo Almeida, who himself shouldn't have been in the title picture. You can't justify giving Talis Latis a title shot because he beat Nate Marquardt, even though Nate Marquardt had 2 points taken away and still won on one judge's scorecard. And you know what, Anderson? I wish Anderson Silva would come out and talk about the fact that he's probably actually very frustrated about that, because you look at those fights, and I think it's quite clear. The UFC would love you to believe that those were legitimate fights, but they weren't. Anderson didn't treat them as such, and he, basically showed that. I'm not saying that Dream isn't crooked. I fully believe it is. That's why Pride went under. But you're no better. It's the pot calling to Cal Black. It's no, you don't do it. It's asinine to do it. It's asinine to believe it. You look at it, of course, the recent thing with the MMA game from EA Sports. Apparently, EA Sports turned them down 3 years ago, and all of a sudden, UFC on the THQ game, UFC. Damn it, I can't remember the name of it. UFC, whatever. Gets released, sells. I believe it is 5 million copies. And they say, EA Sports suddenly wants to do a game. I don't know if anyone knows anything about video game development. Even on a very, very basic level. Like, let's take my MMA sim. It's been talked about a lot. There are about 20 people who are responsible for that. It is not done to a professional level, in any way, shape, or form. It has no graphics. which is a huge thing. It has no graphics engine, which is a huge thing. The only graphic is a menu and a little thing that